Welcome to another in the series of Idea Collider, where we talk to some of the people who I think are the most interesting within our industry on the subject I find most interesting, which is innovation. And actually a slight alternative perspective on how we see things from this episode's guest, which is Amrit Chaudhuri. So Amrit, welcome to Idea Collider. I've wanted to feature you for a while, but you're always somewhere in the world. Can you tell us about you and something about SmartLabs?
Sure. I'm Amrit Chaudhuri. I'm the CEO and co-founder of SmartLabs. I'm trained as a bioengineer and a synthetic protein chemist. Specifically, I did peptide-based research for almost a decade. And I have been lucky enough to be a serial entrepreneur in the biotech space, working on drug development, bioinformatics, and now the infrastructure that enables research and development here at SmartLabs.
So tell us more about infrastructure and SmartLabs. What is it that, what do you do? What's the kind of main product of your business?
Sure. So we are a company that builds research and development centers designed for pharmaceutical research at an enterprise scale that are also designed to be shared. So it's the idea of taking co-working and applying it to pharmaceutical science. From an industry perspective, we create not really incubator space. It's not designed for early stage cash-strapped startups. It's a professional enterprise scale environments that are private for research teams of 50, 100, 75, down to 10 or 20, where we custom build, operate, and run pharmaceutical research labs for groups that can be startups, but are also very commonly corporate users.
Okay, and can you tell us where those spaces are based?
Sure. We are founded and headquartered in Boston. So we have buildings in Kendall Square near MIT. We have buildings in Boston proper, in the Boston Seaport, and between Boston University and Harvard Business Schools. We have 4 locations here in Boston that account for 200,000 plus square feet of space. And we are excited to announce that we are expanding to South San Francisco. So we're building an 80,000 square foot facility in South San Fran that we hope to open in Q4 of 2020.
So that was new news to me, because the assumption was that San Francisco wasn't as red hot as Boston and Cambridge. You said you're 100% wrong, Mike. We're kind of already successful there. Can you tell me more about the South San Francisco space?
Yeah, sure. South San Francisco, the space itself, or the environment of South San Francisco for biotech?
Yeah, the environment for biotech, because I think that's one of the kind of big, I guess, ideas has been that South San Francisco, or San Francisco itself, was lucky to have Genentech. But after that, it's really seen a tech boom, but not really a biotech or a pharmaceutical boom. But your
so I beg to differ.
Yeah, definitely different now.
So outside of, and this is the big question, where is the central hub of biotech, both in the United States and then therefore the world? If you take a look at the density, total number of researchers, amount of VC funding, and the presence of major pharma, the Bay Area is actually in the same order of magnitude as Boston and Kendall Square. Mm-hmm. So much so, it's within literally a few percentage of each other in each of these. So if on a year over year, you listen to Boston getting $2.7 billion of VC funding, that same year you might see San Francisco get anywhere from 2.5 to 3, depending. And it's neck and neck who has a higher year every year. To give you context, those two numbers represent about 70% of all the venture funding in the United States towards biotech and healthcare. So it's tremendous between those. It's 35 and 35% approximately of the nation's VC funding funneled these two metric geographies. there are also similar number of actual startup companies. So the number of startups, which are in the hundreds, both reside in the Bay Area and in the Metro Boston area. The difference is the aggregation. I would say that Kendall Square, as an epicenter in Boston, located in Cambridge next to MIT, accounts for almost 80% of that large-scale aggregation of startups, where the other 20% is spread a little bit further out in the Metro Boston area. Whereas in the Bay Area, South San Francisco as a city probably accounts for about 60% of that number, of similar numbers, where 20% is in the East Bay, the Emeryville, Berkeley area, and another 20% is in Mid-Pacific Peninsula and South Bay, near Menlo Park, Palo Alto, etc., near the Stanford Medical School and etc. area. So it's a slightly more geographically spread out density, but still effectively the second most dense environment in the world.
And there was something circulating on Twitter last week about the absence of available space within the Boston-Cambridge area, as in 0% vacancy. Is that number something I heard the right way, or?
That is fundamentally true. I think that technically there may be, if there are, let's call it 20 million square feet of biotech real estate in terms of space, lab space in the Boston-Cambridge area, today there are maybe 100,000 square feet, maybe 150,000 square feet of overall available space. That is today available, and in the pipeline in the future, almost all of the spaces in the next 2-3 years are committed. And so it really is a sub 1% vacancy in that market. Surprisingly enough, the same is effectively true of South San Francisco. South San Francisco, instead of a 20 million square foot market, is about a 15 million square foot market with, again, 100, 200,000-ish square feet of vacancy for companies that isn't either under negotiation or committed.
Interesting. And how does this, because clearly what's happened in Boston has been the subject of conversation. So what are the drivers of critical mass in those two places, and not say New York or Philadelphia or somewhere else?
Or Seattle or any of the other cities that people are pointing, or San Diego.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. San Diego is actually a very unique outlier that kind of bucks the mold. There's a lot of biotech there, not as much large company presence, but a very healthy amount of small to mid-sized company presence there that has a completely different thesis set. And it's kind of the ecosystem you look at and say, okay, let's figure out the ecology there. I think the challenge is that, let's take a look at New York. The theory was, if there's space available, if there's scientific talent available, and if there's money, then that creates a biotech ecosystem. And it used to be the old adage of what everyone used to think of as what's required to do that correctly. Technically, New York has more PhD level scientists than Boston. Population-wise, there are, number-wise, more people with those degrees, mostly in academic or institutional environments, but definitely there. New York has an order of magnitude more money than either of these other cities of San Francisco and Boston in terms of pure investment funding available and the type of large-scale private equity investment groups that you'd be thinking about, including some powerhouse VCs in biotech, Deerfield, OrbiMed, others that are New York focused and based, if not branches of tens of others that locate there. And New York has had a lot of opportunity for space. Alexandria, the real estate investment trust, has almost 1 million square feet there. There have been multiple endeavors by local landlords to accommodate biotech. Long Island City is a biotech hub that's up and coming. People are talking about biotech happening near the Columbia campus. There are some fundamental availabilities that are there, but you haven't seen the rise of biotech there in the same way that you have in Boston and in San Francisco and even in San Diego. And I hesitate to say, the rate at which Philly is growing as a biotech city is stronger and more controlled than New York's. There's an actual growth rate you can monitor year over year, and more venture funding going there, more company growth happening there, actual deals forming out of those spaces at a rate that is faster than New York's, and a size that is larger than New York's. I think I read a report that in New York there was a total of 1.2 million square feet of biotech commercial space, as opposed to 28 million in the Metro San Diego area, 28 million in the overall Bay Area, and 28 to 30 million in the Metro Boston area. So just to give you context.
Yeah, so something isn't happening in New York that has happened somewhere else. Is you know, within those kind of critical factors, is there something that you would speculate was missing here?
I would say that most of the other cities have either had organic growth over time. So biotech as a industry really started in San Francisco and Boston. The Biogen and Genzyme in Boston, the Genentech in South San Francisco really were people who established this initial idea of going away from chemistry companies, which is what all pharmaceutical companies were 40 years ago, into biology-based companies. That ringing of that bell and saying aggregate here happened, 25, 30 years ago in both these environments. And then realistically, it was the interplay between cheap space that was available. Kendall Square, I grew up in Cambridge for the record, so I've lived here since 1989. Kendall Square was a vacancy of parking lots and single-story warehouses that were dollars a square foot in terms of cheapness to buy, not to rent. South San Francisco was next to the airport and was filled with industrial warehouses. And so between that, the cities want to support new technological fields. The investment the states have made into supporting the academic commercial environments, and the slow aggregation of companies that have grown and then become acquired by major firms, Sanofi buying Genzyme, Takeda buying everybody, Shire, Millennium, Ariad, I think the largest group right now in Massachusetts, if I'm not mistaken, Novartis. Fundamentally, after the shift of Sipa Geigy and Sandoz merging to create Novartis in the 90s, and then saying, wow, we're going to shift from being a European R&D center focused organization to standing up the headquarters of research in Cambridge, Massachusetts, with the invention of NIBR. I mean, these major things happened that aggregated major pharmaceutical talent. And it turns out being a PhD in chemistry or a PhD in biology does not make you an expert in drug development. In fact, you can call being a drug development industry expert a second career. You do your academic career and you learn how to think and you learn how to do science. And then you start over again and you learn what it means to build a drug, what it means to do early stage research, what preclinical research really looks like, what clinical stage research really looks like, and the nuances of getting a drug from into the IND, into phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and an NDA. That management talent, understanding of regulatory challenges, understanding of hey, what is dosing, right? How do you properly dose a patient? What is the max therapeutic dose we should go for? Where are we at risk? Right? And companies fall flat on their face in some of these situations. And then that management level talent at a real industry commercial pharma scale, that filter and start branching off and creating startups where they are startup leaders, C-level, VP level, at these smaller, well-funded companies, that they're able to go in and give that company some certainty that, hey, great, you took some technology out of MIT or Harvard or UCSF or anywhere, right? This technology is coming from globally anywhere, from Berlin, from Pittsburgh, from all over the place. I can take that technology, understand it, put a team together, and navigate them through what it means to actually develop a drug. That management level talent does not exist today in large scale in places like New York. You just don't find them there. And then you have the other risks associated with that. People who make career changes outside of San Francisco and Boston, who going from a Novartis down to a startup that's flagship or Third Rock backed or something, for 2 years, that doesn't require any real change of life. Your family's not moving. You're not really even changing your commute. You're going 2 blocks over from where you were showing up for work, a year ago. And if that fails, there are a literal 1,000 companies you can join, all within 2 square miles, where you are a subject matter expert. You go somewhere else, you go to Philadelphia or New York, you join a startup, you move your family, you try it out, and it fails, you're moving your family again, potentially, to find your next major opportunity, either in the industry, at a major organization, or at another startup environment.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I'll look back to so you've adequately described the difference between the kind of idea that starts a company and the competency that gets it to market or to late stage. And I think that's always part of what we've talked about, right? The difference between invention, innovation. Lots of people have good ideas, but the rest of it is work and knowledge, and not screwing it up right on the way through. Knowing what it is that you're doing. One thing that always struck me, I remember the first time I came to, when it was Mass Innovation Labs, looking at the companies on the, listed on the wall, you had some huge companies or interesting companies like Editas and CRISPR sitting within the same space, and oncology companies sitting next to each other within the same building. Yeah. Which I always found intriguing. What was your experience of seeing, people who you would naturally think of as competitive sharing corridor space? And
it's actually funny you mentioned this. I was looking at a S1 filing earlier today on one of the historic companies that was in our space, and I found 2 executives from 2 of their competitors on their board. I think people love talking about competition as if it is a zero-sum game, right? It's either my cancer drug wins or your cancer drug wins. The reality is that almost everybody, even in the exact same space, neoantigen-based personalized medicine, CRISPR-based gene therapies, everyone's looking at different targets. So it's not that Editas and CRISPR are, one has to win and one has to lose. Their goals of the patient populations and how they hope to be leaders in that sector are fundamentally different. And the truth is that half of their employees at both companies were in the same labs in grad school and postdoc, right? You're competing against the guy you were sitting on a bench with for 5 years, right before joining this company. You still go out and get beers. You still go out and grab lunch. You still go and part of the same bowling league or whatever else they do socially. You have to take the fact that these are human beings who are highly inquisitive, love socializing amongst people of similar intellectual interests, and just happen to be working on different targets and different projects with different logos above their company. These are passionate people. Yeah. And I think that as long as they're, have a good head on their shoulders and they're not divulging their company's molecules and secrets, I think that it's actually a very collaborative environment. It's the same reason that today, just pointing this out, the North America headquarters for R&D for Pfizer is all of 20 feet away from the North America headquarters for Novartis, right? And I mean 20 feet like an actual 20 feet. You could be standing in Pfizer's window looking into a lab at Novartis, like across the alleyway. And yet it works.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that ecosystem that you described of the ability to move, the risk-taking culture is one. I mean, the one downside of that is, some of the folks that, I've met over the years that you might regard as mediocre, suddenly are still in demand within an ecosystem like that. So there's a risk that in sort of hoovering up, or being able to easily leave and go somewhere else, that you end up, some of those big companies who will pay a lot of money for anyone to go to Boston or San Francisco at the moment. Will take what they can get and find out later that they're not so good. But I wholly accept the argument about talent finds itself, and then sometimes management finds what it needs. But I'm interested in your views on kind of what you've seen in terms of cultural approaches and leadership approaches within the biotech space, because you've seen enough companies come and go now to have drawn some ideas about how to do this.
It's I mean, honestly, it's wildly different, right? I've had a privilege, like the first company I worked at, we had partnerships with major pharma organizations down to academic centers on different projects using peptides that we would work on. And then at SmartLabs, and historically, right before our name change, Mass Innovation Labs, we've had 60, 70 meaningful companies, half of which are not startups, are major $1 billion, $10 billion, $100 billion biotechs, doing really cutting edge R&D through our program. I think that I'm going to break this into two sections. There's the corporate view, and seeing some of the really innovative things happening and spinning off of or being supported by the corporate side has been really interesting. And then there's this startup view. So startup founders and executives are really one of three breed of characters. They're either that prominent academic who founded the company out of their lab and was able to get VC or other external funding and spin it off into a commercial endeavor and still keep leadership. It's partners at VCs who historically have come from some form of industry appointment and or experience in other startups that are focused on certain milestones and getting their company to certain milestones, and or it's pharma VPs, let's call it R&D VPs, that come in and become new CSOs, CEOs, etc. We are lucky enough to have a tremendous relationship with Kronos. Kronos's CEO is the ex-CSO of Gilead. Like amazing scientific talent. Sana talk about a company with tremendous chops. One of the scientific founders of CRISPR and the two guys behind Juno, founded that company together. So tremendous experience of bringing real drugs to market and doing really innovative R&D. So academics are very, very research focused. Their milestones are really driven by their capital partner saying, show me this research milestone, and then they're razor focused on how do you build that R&D competency to get through that milestone all the way into an IND. And I've seen multiple times academics that can get into that phase 1 IND. It's really usually somewhere short after that you really see shifts where you bring in more senior mid-level management or senior level management to help facilitate the steps that happen afterwards. Great, your drug didn't kill anyone in your phase 1. What now? What's the correct dosing? How do you figure out manufacturing issues, formulation? How do you figure out delivery methodology? What is the next step in your phase 2, phase 3? That has to come from people with experience. You can use a large number of consultants, but there's something about ownership in that process. That historically comes from mid-size to large-size biopharma and pharma. So mid-size being a Vertex, all the way up to an Amgen and Biogen. Large scale obviously being the big boys that we all know about. But you'll see regularly that level of talent coming in and starting to filter and restructure organizations at that stage. If the academic didn't found and push that company forward, the alternative you see very often is VC partners or entrepreneurs in residence or et cetera at these major venture organizations. And they usually stay through the first 4 or 5 years of a company, right? I would say the average tenure is through getting into a phase 1 and or possibly being in a phase 2. But then it's usually a point in time where there's an IPO, there's an acquisition, there's some restructuring if the company needs to grow in a different way, and different types of senior leadership come on board.
Right.
And it's just it's a very different experience, and that startup VC entrepreneur jumps into their new endeavor. And I literally haven't seen a VC partner to date stay on for more than maybe 5 years, 6 years. I want to say the exception is probably the CEO of Alnylam, right? Heavily worked with Third Rock. We used to work with Mark Levin at Millennium. Was the chief business officer in the BD department at Millennium. and really came in, helped build an asset, sell an asset group, and then come in early on to Alnylam's history and staying with the development of that company in a transformative way. That's the actual outlier in that situation, but has done remarkably well.
Succeeded despite sentiment seeming to go the other way for a while.
When we started at Mass Innovation Labs, we were their next door neighbor. They were the building next to us, and in fact, after we left our first building, they took our building. They're the new occupants of 675 West Kendall's. So it was interesting because you saw right in like 2015 that like high level of anticipation for that company. This clinical hold or failure that crashed it down, and the remarkably strategic way of building that back up, making sure the science came first, making sure that the employees understood that they were trying to change patient lives, and being able to claw their way back up to immense success where they are today. It's truly transformative. And it's actually a wonderful example of the tenacity of these teams, these multi-hundred person teams that are building some real things.
Yeah, and the value of a kind of strategic champion within the space. So, I mean, a big question that gets raised here is about all of the examples we've talked about are the US. Where, if you're looking back to why South San Francisco, why Boston, maybe San Diego, maybe Philadelphia, why not London, Cambridge, Oxford, or Basel, or somewhere in China? Can you give me a geographic overview of what's hot, what's not?
Great. I am so the business person in me says follow the money. Where is the funding for R&D and new ideas in R&D coming from? And if it's really the startups that help build those ecosystems as large companies change their strategies, move large groups, etc., where is that money? How much money in total was spent in England in venture capital? I will tell you that the country of England spent less than the city of San Diego in venture capital. And it has to do with just profiles of risk, right? So the US public markets historically have supported biotech and pharmaceuticals as an industry. Think about it. Like, you have a company being valued at billions of dollars that make zero revenue at that time, that you hope 10 years from then are going to make revenue. I mean, Alnylam is another example. They are now on path to making revenue, but when did they go public, and when was their first drug commercialized, right? And how patient was the public market in supporting the growth and sustainability of that company? That doesn't exist in Asia, right? First off, the Chinese markets, other markets, they're trying to learn how to do that right now. But if you do not have revenue, you are not a publicly listed company, effectively. Right. You raise privately, and you, after proving that you are a thing that somebody will buy, will you get investors behind you. That's also somewhat of the European model. Lesser so. Europe's somewhere in between the extremes of what I think of the Asian market and the free-flowing cash flow of the US market. But it is somewhere in between, and it raises challenges to how does a venture company, if I am a venture capitalist, if I go and build a new fund in England, in China, how do I build a fund as large as Third Rock or Deerfield or NEA by convincing people that I'm going to fund companies that will have to be acquired, which means that you have to be looking for acquisitions in that sector, and or can go public. I don't know how we go, public on the European markets the same way the US markets are done. And in that situation, why wouldn't I just take the idea and bring it to the US where it's easier? Right. And there's that aggregation. Yeah. That's the honest challenge. Also, just saying this out loud, you get your clinical trial done in the US, you have the easiest path forward everywhere else in the world. That is, the opposite is not true. And if it costs the same amount of money, why wouldn't you have the US FDA approve your drug, then go to the EU, and then go everywhere else for your patient populations? It just makes more strategic sense. A return on capital, risk profile, validation, right?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, certainly it's something that's being discussed in, London at the moment, because clearly London, Oxford has a big fund for the UK, but
Yeah.
as you say, in a relative sense, it's not. It's not even table stakes in in the US. So there's lots of ideas looking for backing that and that management of
Also,
ecosystem is going to be important.
what is the square footage available of lab space in London?
I suspect you know the answer to this way better than I do.
Zero.
Okay.
Today, if I wanted, to be very clear, I would love to be in London,
Mhm.
just because it's great. And I think it's a great growth area. I think it's in Europe, the largest growth area for biotech. But if I today I said, Mike, show me around London, and I'm going to go pick 100,000 square foot building that I'm going to go build a biotech into, there isn't one.
Okay.
London real estate, first, is very complicated because of the history behind how real estate works in London. But even thereafter, the prices that I'd be willing to pay in rent, you can get from Google without having to invest into building a biotech building and building a tech building, which is way cheaper.
Mm.
So if you make £100 a square foot from a biotech venture and you make £100 a square foot from Google, and for Google you spend £900 building it, and for the biotech venture you're spending £1,400 building it, why would you ever do that?
Mm. Yeah. So something you told me last time we spoke was about how these two converge, right? The tech world wants the same kind of space that the biotech world wants, and
It's a little secret there. It turns out that biotech buildings are actually really, really great, right? You have higher ceilings, heavier floors, more power, more HVAC. They're usually designed in a certain way, and they actually make phenomenal multi-use, multi-flexible environments. You can build a data center. You can build, offices with starkly high, ceilings that are vaulted. Not just on one floor, but on every floor. It's a remarkably flexible environment, and I think that if you take a look at Kendall Square, you take a look at the history of the largest REIT in biotech, Alexandria. Alexandria is the first true major international biotech REIT, founded by the way, as a concept, only founded in the 90s, right?
Mhm.
This is not, biotech real estate has not been in existence for 100 years.
Yep.
Like every other industry, it's been in existence for 30 years,
Mhm.
approximately. Before biotech REITs existed, every major institution, whether you're a pharma company, Genentech, a university, had to buy the land and build their own buildings in order to then build a lab environment to do research out of. So let's just put a pin on that and put that aside as a concept. Alexandria's success actually could be traced back to the fact that in the late 90s and early 2000s, they were in the Bay Area promoting biotech environments and biotech buildings. And this little startup called Google came along and said, oh, we'll take these, and has taken massive swaths of that campus and said, wow, we can build data centers and we can do all these things that a regular office building can't accommodate for us as a tech industry. So it's always been it's funny, it's funny that I use data centers as an example. The shift that we as a company are trying to make in the industry is exactly the shift that happened to data centers in this last decade. 15 years ago, every tech company, whether you're Facebook, Google, a startup based out of San Francisco, whoever you were, cars.com, you, in order to be a web-based application company, had to go and build your own server farms and data centers in order to have infrastructure to work off of, past the offices that you needed. Today, that's no longer the case. In fact, if you today went to a tech VC and said, hey, write me a $15 million check, $7 million goes to me building a data center, and $8 million goes to me building a company, you'd be laughed out of the office. They'd say, what is wrong with you? Go to the Amazon cloud, go to Microsoft Azure. Why in God's name would you want to build something that they build cheaper, faster, better, and operate better with more consistency, with no capital expenditures up front? Our goal as an organization is to do that to the pharmaceutical industry. If you're Pfizer or Novartis, or if you're a mid-sized biotech company and your goal is to build a drug, and commercialize a drug and then market and sell a drug. Where in that is being a landlord a requirement? Where in that is having to run your own research labs requirement? The capital, the expenditure, the limit of flexibility, the liability take on. How is that? It's not anything incongruous, in fact, to nimble, fast-shifting research.
Yeah, especially at the kind of scale that the scaling that you're describing some of your companies go through as they go from one stage to the next.
Yeah.
To have made that as a
from 10 to multi-hundred. From 10 to multi-hundred people, forecasting that and appropriately accommodating that in each stage of growth is remarkably hard.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so London, China, in terms of expansion plans, do we see biotech coming in from anywhere else that's kind of I wouldn't say it's camped out on the US's door? Or
biotech comes to the US from all over the place, literally from all over the place. And if it's not the companies moving to the US, which constantly are happening, companies relocating divisions of R&D, divisions of their organization, it's the ideas. You'll see that. I can tell you that numerous companies that were started in Cambridge that we helped grow and support, the intellectual property came from universities and organizations all over the world. It's not there's this biased idea that, Kendall Square is Kendall Square because all of the IP comes from Harvard and MIT. A lot of IP comes from Harvard and MIT, but not all. In fact, I would say 40% of the IP comes from everywhere else.
Yeah, because that's the popular myth, right? It's just Bob Langer throwing off companies.
Oh yeah. No, it's and he does a great job of doing so. He's prolific in it. But the reality is that we have built an environment that is so conducive in the US and specifically the geographies I'm talking about, that is so conducive to reducing the hurdles of having successful science, that the larger those environments become, the harder it is to justify going outside of that environment. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Yeah. Kendall Square today is twice the size of what it was 10 years ago, literally twice the size. And if Kendall Square today is almost 20 million square feet, there will be 14 million square feet added in the next 4 years.
Wow, that's incredible. And it's sort of unsurprising as soon as you start to draw parallels between, say, the way that look at the history of innovation, the way cities grow, and I'm sitting in our New York office, which is just down from Diamond Row, and you go, well, you got a couple of hundred diamond shops literally sitting next to each other that all wanted to be next to each other for a good reason.
The Diamond District.
Yeah, and that's often the way the cities grow, right? Is that you have clustering, so it's almost like you do that thought experiment. Despite everyone being together, or where they go, maybe it's because of everyone being together that suddenly systems get better.
Yep. And let's take a look at the from, let's call it Midtown West all the way down to kind of the meatpacking district. I can literally from Chelsea Market up point to millions of square feet going to literally Apple, Google, Amazon. Like in a row next to each other. Yeah. It's crazy. All in what is arguably some of the most expensive real estate in the world. Right. Which is that because people want to be there.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually, ironically, sometimes it's less expensive to recruit young folks into a city like this than it would be to put them into
100%.
Orange
That's
County.
100% it. Yeah. The reality is that the cost of people and the cost of your R&D and projects so far outstrips the cost of your real estate that real estate and the cost of real estate should not even be part of your equation. In reality, if you're running if somebody's running a $500 million R&D program, right, and you're talking about having 200,000 square feet of real estate in Boston and Kendall Square, that's a $20 million commitment a year. And someone might argue with you, well, go put that in North Carolina for $7 million instead. I'm going to look at you in the face and say, you can spend $20 million in Boston or $7 million in North Carolina. You're spending $500 million a year. Who has the better talent population today, and where can you recruit and add talent to most easily for the highest chance of success? And remember, unlike most other industries, our industry is binary. Your drug works or it does not. And so it's a hard.
And it's binary in the sense that, I mean, so it works or it does not, or you prove that it works or you don't. Because I think there's, one of the things that we talked about a lot is that two different companies will do a very different job on the same molecule.
Oh, 100%.
So, clearly one is going to be more successful than the other. So it's going to come down to some of those people making decisions that, take you towards success or take you away from it. So I'm interested in maybe more a broader conversation on, some of the things I ask everyone, like, maybe first of all, just, do you ever think about how to define innovation?
How to define innovation? I think interesting that we have our own definition of innovation over here. It's not doing things differently for the sake of doing things. It's the iterative process in which you, using data, monitor a situation, create findings, whether or not that results are positive or negative, look at the process people use, and iteratively change it to see whether that likelihood of success increases or decreases. So we look at iterative innovation as constantly getting better by looking at what you're doing and thinking about what you're doing along the way. I think that's for us, at least for the sector of the industry that we work in, and really historically in my career, that's how I've always thought about progress.
And so you're talking about this kind of feedback loop for decision making, and
So let's talk about. Let's pretend that I'm right. Imagine that. I like to pretend that I'm right, right? So let's imagine
I wouldn't
that.
Bet against it.
Yeah. Let's say that the iterations are what causes innovation and progress. So if you have an experiment, or if you have a process that's in place, and the time between your iterations are years, and I'm going to actually call out infrastructure, right? Company builds a building, builds a lab. It's a decade before they rebuild that lab, maybe 3 decades before they rebuild that lab. How do they know their workflows are correct? How do they know that they have the right separation of safety? Who goes back and says, let's rethink that. Let's figure out workflows again, relay this out, and see if that increases or decreases the time it takes, or the success rate, or reducing contamination, or reproducibility, right? That's an extreme example in infrastructure of saying, hey, wow, you could be Novartis, you could have more resources than anybody else, but in 50 years, you could have 5 iterations of thought leadership around what works and what doesn't. And by the way, once you commit to something, the next 10 years is locked in, whether that was actually beneficial or not to your productivity. We, as an organization, in 5 years build 100 labs, right? So we iterate at such a small life cycle that, like, think of it from an evolutionary perspective, the compounded evolutionary perspective we have is just so far beyond in terms of modifying ideas that we just are ahead of the curve in how we do that design at work. Think of that from a scientific perspective. If you reduce the life cycle of an experiment, how much more learning can you do? And then you have other challenges, right? How do you actually address those larger data sets and learn from them? And that's the entire computational, and how do you deal with high throughput research and big data and biopharma. It used to be, 40 years ago at Merck, a chemist would have 100 compounds that they could look at every bond, look at and analyze themselves. Well, now you have 100,000 compounds. How do you do the same type of thought analysis as a chemist, right? How are you supposed to look at and evaluate those things in classes and that type of information? The way that you have to think of an experiment and how you even just analyze the data coming off of it is changing.
Yeah, no, it entirely fits with, we've been essentially launching this idea of asymmetric learning. So the idea that your competitive advantage as an organization is going to be about your ability to learn, not just do the same
100%,
thing.
100%.
Yeah.
In my theory is the same.
Yeah.
Learning is what gets you forward, not let you by trying to stumble on a molecule that happens to work.
Right. Not just keep hoping on luck gets you there. We don't have a long time now, which is a shame. But so I'm going to ask you how people can find out more about you later. But tell me, Amrit, what drives you personally?
What drives me personally? I think that if you can do something to change how the system works, it's it's not just your job to, it's like your moral obligation to go make that change. So if, I could probably go into tech startups and other things, but I think that if I get to go and change healthcare, and I get to go and affect the success rate of research and how fast, even if it's not the success rate, how fast a drug gets to market, instead of taking 7 years, it takes 6 years. I think it's your moral obligation to work on that type of project, because that year means millions of patient lives.
Right.
And I think that you should, everyone talks about living up to their potential, but what does that mean? Different people define it differently. A lot of people define that from a monetary perspective. I define it as impact. And I think that's just very lucky that the environment I grew up in was one that emphasized that. How do you make the largest impact in the world for benefit?
Mm-hmm. Give me that for the folks who are listening. The environment you grew up in was.
So I'm Indian ethnicity. I was born in New Delhi. My parents were academics. My mom was in the libraries. She was at MIT at the Whitehead, and then at Boston University for the majority of her career. Little stint in Harvard and at Tufts as well. My father was an academic. Most of his career was at Harvard Medical School. He was a researcher in biochemistry. So I grew up surrounded by science and surrounded by amazing people. His former PI was Edgar Haber, the former president of Bristol Myers Squibb, who was the head of cardiology at MGH. We were surrounded by remarkable people who were doing remarkable things that weren't necessarily driven by money, but also driven by impact. And so I got to grow up in a wonderful, loving, nurtured, well-exposed environment in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and got to take advantage of all of those resources, and hopefully get instilled with some of that ethos of doing good. So it was amazing.
Phenomenal. And do you ever do 5-10-year horizons? Do you have ambitions for where you'll be in 2025?
It's funny. I was asked this by, we went through a round of funding this last quarter. That was somebody asked me something very similar. Somebody asked me what I'm doing next after SmartLabs, what we're going to do next. And I looked at this person. I said, look, if we run 250,000 square feet of R&D labs today, and our ambition is to go and run 3 to 5 million square feet 5 to 10 years from now, 3 to 5 million square feet of R&D labs that we run will mean that we run more R&D individually than any major pharma company individually. We will have more pure R&D labs than a Novartis or Pfizer or Merck or anybody else, with more that in all of those labs iterating at a speed that is really interesting. There are so many interesting things you can do with that. Why would I do something else?
And if you do that, and if you apply that kind of principle of innovation, that the folks who are sitting in your labs at that point, anyone betting that Novartis's folks are going to be more productive than your folks because of the diversity, because of the almost the competition between teams and approaches. If you believe in the principles of innovation, you'd have to bet on that being the way forward.
Yeah, I think it's going to change the way that people work in a laboratory. Yeah. That's our goal, right? As an organization, that's what we hope to do.
Exciting. Last question. Books. Do you have any books that you'd recommend to anyone who'd like to get to the place that you're at?
Interestingly enough, I have done a lot of soul searching as an executive in the last, I want to say, year and a half, especially as we're going through rounds of growth. The books that I've been looking at haven't been about the biotech industry, but are really about thought leadership and management. And I love Kotter's books. What is the name of it? That's Not How We Do It Here. Mm-hmm. It is a quirky, great introduction to changing organizational strategy. It gives you current cutting-edge methodology. And for the record, Cotter is a historic professor at Harvard Business School, is one of the leaders in the field of change management, and the new way of thinking around change management. He's been a leader for the last 40 years. Literally, if people who are in that sector will refer to him as one of the hallmarks of change management. And it's interesting because the entire book is set in the form of a children's fable around meerkats and how a colony of meerkats survive. It's quirky, it is easy to digest, and it starts you on a path of really starting to think about how do organizations innovate while they expand, while they grow, while change is happening, and where are the pitfalls of leadership and management as part of that. I think it's fascinating.
No, I would agree with the choice, and actually because one thing the industry is struggling with, right, is the idea of transformation, change management, but actually the from and to haven't been well defined within the space. So there's a lot of incremental change instead of significant change. So I welcome that. And Amrit, given that we're out of time, if someone wants to find out more about you, can they find you easily, or are you?
I am available both on LinkedIn as well as you can just contact us at SmartLabs.
Nice. And SmartLabs is smartlabs.com.
Smartlabs.com.
There you go. Fantastic. Amrit, thank you so much, sir. I've enjoyed this, and certainly it's been mind expanding once again. So,
Mike, always a pleasure talking. Literally every time.
We need to do this more often.
In fact, we do.
Yeah. Good man. Thanks.